Welcome to this episode of Sdrl News Live. I'm Andy McCaskey from Sdrl News, and we're continuing our series here on the role of teleconferencing, particularly from an IT manager's perspective. And our guest here today, a familiar face, Mr. Tim Crawford from Avoa, who joins us from California. And of course, Tim, as you know, is a well-known speaker at many industry events. He's also a prolific author and blogger, and was formerly the director of IT at Stanford Business School in California. So, Tim, welcome back.
Thanks, Andy, for having me. Glad to be part of the program again, and such an interesting topic to boot.
Well, it is. And of course, you and I both were a part of the Life Size Tech Day in Austin, Texas here recently. But I think because of your perspective over the years, you've probably seen teleconferencing evolve and the demands on the IT manager change as well.
It has. It's moved from, at least from what I've seen, it's moved from the perspective of being tied to a fixed room and going from room to room to pretty much doing video conferencing from wherever you are using mobile devices. So I think we've seen the pendulum swing quite a bit in a more user-friendly approach, in that you can use pretty much any device you want from any location to be able to join a video conference. And that's quite a bit different than what we've been accustomed to in the past.
Well, and I think it's very, it's a common failing to dwell on the technology, which is just absolutely amazing with the variety of choices you have. But you and I have talked a little bit about this is really reflecting a different way in which people work and interact. How about speaking to that?
Yeah, I've written a bit about this as well. The challenge is that we're so accustomed to just picking up the phone and making a phone call if we need to reach someone, or sending an email if it's something ad hoc that we're not sure if the person is available. We'll send them an email. And the problem is that you miss a majority of the communication that happens through body language. And so, video conferencing, I think, has historically been kind of pushed to the side, partly because culturally we're not accustomed to just picking up the phone, so to speak, and making a video call, but partly because the technology just hadn't evolved to the point where we could actually do that. And I think some of the consumer products are starting to kind of help evolve how we think about and use video conferencing. And that's a good thing, because now we can start to implement and leverage that other path of communication, the body language, into the core discussion, which is similar to what we might see when we're sitting face to face or across the room from someone.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has really been an evolution of my thinking as a part of producing this series of interviews is the technology of transferring a picture from one place to another. It's been doing amazing things, particularly in mobile devices. But really what you're managing is the interaction and awareness of attention of those that are participating, as opposed to a webinar kind of environment.
I've done this, and I'm sure many folks have, where you get on a webinar and you might be doing other things simultaneously. You might be checking email, you might even get a phone call, but you're typically multitasking. And the thing in the human element that I find really interesting, and there have been a few studies on this, is that humans don't necessarily multitask. They just do a pretty good job of masking it, meaning they're switching quickly between different tasks. However, when you're video conferencing, when you're looking at someone face to face, what I find is that your attention is solely in that conversation. Meaning, if I were to move off and I might be doing something else or picking up the phone and oh, I've got a phone call, I need to make a call, you're going to see it. And so I'm a lot more conscious of what I'm doing when I'm in video conferencing, as opposed to web conferencing or even audio conferencing.
But a part of our business culture, though, is very much of this meet me model, where you have a bridge number, or a video bridge, and you at the appointed time you come together at that bridge. Do you think that that's really going to evolve to where that's no longer a part of the enterprise?
It already is. We're already starting to see that in the consumer space where people are using technology like FaceTime on the iPhone to do video conferencing one-to-one. We see that in Skype, from a one-to-one perspective. And I think that if we follow other trends that we see in other spaces outside of video conferencing, I think what we'll find is that this will start to permeate into the enterprise where you'll move away from a predefined scheduled time to do video conferencing, and you'll start to feel very comfortable literally just picking up the phone or initiating a video conference call with someone. So if I wanted to get a hold of you and have a conversation, I just dial up Andy as if I were having a phone call with him, except that it's a video conferencing call. And I'm okay with that, and so are you.
Well, one of the things that I've certainly noticed the past several weeks, having access to the life-size ClearSea client, is this notion of presence, where you can be aware that someone is A, online, and B, available for conferencing, and with the knowledge that you can add a third or additional people to the call as well. Now, this has been kind of this vision of unified communications, but that's been around for a long time.
Yes, presence is not new. Probably the first real entry of presence that we saw was in chat. So you might have a chat program that's up on your desktop or laptop, and the other person does too, and so you see when they're available and when they're not, and you just pull them up and have a real instantaneous chat. And I think that starts to permeate into other areas. Maybe there have been a few technology hurdles to be able to get there. Unified communications, I would say, is something very different in the sense that unified communications has been seen for a long time of bringing in different avenues or different mediums together. So you might have fax, email, voice, your voicemail all together within one client, within one system. The challenge is it's really complex to leverage from an administrative standpoint. It takes a behavioral change on the user perspective. Oh, and by the way, it's really, really costly. And so for those that have made the leap, they've been able to find some pretty good value in it, but it's a pretty hard leap to make until we start to see the price points come down and the user acceptance and culture change.
Well, then that would lend some credibility to the notion of an overlay network where you would leave your existing PBX, your voice communications, your fax, the legacy fax machines and so forth, leave that installation in place, and then add to this video conferencing or teleconferencing capability.
I think there is something to be said about that. I don't think that we're at a point that really kind of lends itself to a truly unified environment yet. But I think we're definitely converging in that direction from the different paths, whether we're talking about voice, video, data being email or chat. So I think we're heading in that direction, but we've got a few things to work out first before we get there.
Well, and one of them certainly has to be the bandwidth demands as you begin to stack up a number of video connections from consumer type clients. Very quickly that can wreak havoc on the rest of your system.
Bandwidth is definitely an issue, but on the other hand, if we go back in time a little bit here, how many of us only had a dial-up line maybe 10 years ago or so? And today, broadband is very, very common. And I would argue that most folks probably don't use the bandwidth within their broadband connection that they have available at their home or some offices. But that's something that I think will change. We've been seeing for years where pricing for bandwidth is coming down, and so it makes it much more affordable to have a bigger pipe. Plus, the providers are offering more for less. So I remember being a customer of one particular provider in the Bay Area, and it seemed like every time I turned around, my bill wouldn't go up, but rather my bandwidth in terms of available bandwidth would go up. And I think we'll start to see that more and more where large pipes to the home get much more affordable, and even data costs on mobile devices are coming down too.
Hmm. Well, I was thinking about more from an enterprise perspective that very much like when you have a bring your own device situation, you have unintended consequences. The idea of taking teleconference tools that have a good position in the consumer space, you put them into the enterprise space, and things may get complicated.
Yes, and the reason why I brought up the consumer space first is because I do think there are a number of technologies like this that are going to start to permeate in the consumer space and then start to bleed into the enterprise space. But you're absolutely right. I think in the enterprise space, it becomes an issue where you're going to require more bandwidth. But the same thing is true. Bandwidth costs are coming down. Availability is becoming more so the standard. And so I don't think that'll be the biggest hurdle. I think the biggest hurdle will just be finding the right technology or right solution and evolving the culture within the enterprise.
What about from a security or regulatory compliance standpoint?
Regulatory and compliance has always been a hot button for me because that seems to be the big wet blanket that I see get thrown on top of new and innovative solutions. And I'm familiar with a number of different areas. And what I find is that I don't think that this is one area that will be as critical for most people, but there are definitely going to be areas like in healthcare, there will be some video conversations, not all, but some video conversations that will include PHI and patient data. And so we need to think about those situations for or how you manage that data or that video stream for those situations, but don't use that as the blanket that you apply to everything. Take advantage of video where you can for other aspects that may not be governed, even though you do work in a healthcare setting, for example.
Do you see a continuing role for dedicated hardware for hardware MCUs, or do you think everything is going to go to a virtualized environment that's cloud-based, either cloud-based or virtualized on the premise?
I don't think it's any secret that I'm a huge proponent of cloud. Not cloud for the sake of cloud, but cloud for the sake of it's an incredibly powerful enabler for organizations. And we're seeing it being leveraged in a number of different areas. But I think video is one that we should absolutely see the back-end hardware, the back-end software start to get virtualized and start to move into a cloud scenario for a number of reasons, such that the only thing that's really needed on premise is a camera, a microphone, and maybe speakers, so that it's very accessible for the end user. It doesn't require a lot of setup on the back end by the IT organization, and I think we'll see adoption start to evolve because of that.
Well, Tim, it's always good to talk with you and track you down because you are attending a large number of industry events throughout the year. I know you're attending a couple here in the coming weeks. You're also speaking. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. The first week in November, I'm presenting at Cloud Computing Expo in Santa Clara, and I'm sure I'll have some other events coming up at the beginning of the year, but you can always check out my blog where I list all of the different events that I present at, and that's at avoa.com.
Okay. And have you zeroed in on the topic for this conference in November?
Yeah, the conference in November is going to be talking about moving IT to a zero footprint. And what's interesting about that is leveraging cloud, but also looking at how the evolution of data centers plays a role in being able to evolve IT organizations. It's a pretty hot topic in the industry, but rather than just talking about the concept of it, I actually delve into some details of how others have been able to do this and how you can kind of build your roadmap so that you can achieve that state too.
Okay, well, we're certainly looking forward to the synopsis when you get back from that presentation, or maybe a preview here in the next week or so. Thanks for joining us today, Tim, and thanks to you folks for joining us as well here on SDR News Live.